All right, today I'm here with Mark Upton. He's the coaching science manager from EIS. Previous to that, he worked for 12 years in Aussie rules football in Australia. Thank you for joining us today.
Not a problem, Brian. Looking forward to the chat.
All right, I thought we'd start off with the easy questions and practice design, and specifically, why is using more random practice or variable practice preferable to more constant or block practice?
Right. Well, there's a number of theories, I suppose, proposed for why it could be more effective. Um, which is, I think, important to understand that there are some different theories as why it works, but it's not necessarily proven as such.
Right.
Any one theory above another, other than when we seem to practice in a random fashion compared to blocked, we generally get better outcomes in terms of, I guess, the two traditional ways of looking at learning, which are transfer and retention. So, does what we do in practice transfer to a game environment or a match context? And the retention. So, what we do in practice, if we were to come back 2 weeks later, would we retain a certain level of performance and skill level? So, yeah, the evidence suggests that in general that random is more effective than block. So that being random practice schedule being to practice a range of different skills rather than just do a block of 10 or 20 reps of the same skill, which is obviously particularly relevant for team sports and those type of sports where there are a range of different skills. And then I guess the other one that's closely associated, if you want to touch on, is the constant variable.
Yeah, sure.
So,
Yeah.
so often the terms are used interchangeably, but technically in the literature, constant variable is within the one skill. So just practicing the one skill, let's say it is shooting, whether it's soccer, basketball, could be any type of sport where there's ability to shoot. So you're just doing shooting, but you're doing it from all different positions on the pitch or the court, for example, from different distances. That would be practicing in a variable way rather than from the same spot for 20 in a row would be a constant way of practicing that skill.
All right, so the literature tends to favor, the random and the variable practice,
Yeah.
but practitioners or coaches and players are still believe strongly in block practice and constant practice. That if I go out and I shoot 200 straight jump shots, in basketball, that's going to improve my skill more than if I had to intersperse different skills at the same time, and now I may only get 100 jump shots or 50 jump
Mm.
shots because I'm trying to shoot from different spots and I'm trying to dribble and pass or play defense in between my shots or something like that. So how can we reconcile the beliefs of the athletes and the practitioners with what we've seen through literature?
So yeah, I guess that's where we can be. I don't know. Fooled is the right word, but performance in the moment during that practice session when we're using blocked or constant practice can often be higher than if we're using random or variable. And so it's only, we would think, logical to think, well, that's got to be a good thing, doesn't it? That, that's more effective practice and that's what's going to help us in the match situation. But that's where the importance and these principles of transfer and retention come in, because we often see that whilst performance of the skill may be lower in a random schedule, for example, or a variable schedule, actually that they do transfer or retain better longer term, which particularly if learning and development is our focus, well then that's a really important thing to be aware of. And I think all that though is moderated from my experiences around still the engagement and motivation of the athlete. So you often then get asked around, I'm sure you have, Brian, around then, what's the right success rate? Is it, 50%, 5 out of 10? Well, I think for me that really varies depending on, I think really important is that the athlete or the team are still engaged and up for the challenge, because sometimes they stay engaged and they're only getting it 2 out of 10 times.
Right.
Other times, it's 6 or 7, but they're sort of losing interest. So I think that's always, from that real practical point of view, that's still in the mix there.
Okay. So Along those lines, how much, if any, block practice should be incorporated into a practice session or into an athlete's development? Is it something that we only use block practice with the youngest players, and then once they've started to acquire a skill, then we move them on to random and variable practice? Is block practice something that we should uh, continually incorporate just at lower and lower doses, or is it something that we should just eliminate altogether and everything should be random and variable?
Yeah, I think again, there's no single right answer. So um, a lot of this ties into, I think, good observation from the coach in terms of over time, what are you seeing with progression? There's still a definite case, and even, again, some of the research would say early in learning, there's benefits to be had from block practice. And I think it's, again, important, though, to distinguish that might still be variable blocked, not constant blocked. So for me, my rule of thumb generally is, I think, yeah, you can go into some block practice, but I'd be hesitant if you're doing a lot of constant block practice for very, more than a short period of time. I just think you can get more efficient and better returns by at least being variable.
Okay.
So another term, and we may touch on this later on as well, another term that I just probably prefer now is repetition without repetition. So this is a very similar meaning, comes from a guy called Bernstein. People can look and follow up themselves. But yeah, this idea of repetition without repetition, I really think captures this idea of blocked but variable. So yeah, we appreciate that we have to certainly get some volume of repeating a skill or a task. But we don't ever want to repeat it exactly the same way. So we're constantly looking to repeat it in subtly different ways, which again, naturally for a team sport brings into play the fact that, well, the best way to incorporate some variability is to make the skill opposed, is to have a defender involved, which will create natural variability. There's obviously also lots of different ways to create more artificial variability, if you like, with different cues like cards and coloured lights and other different methods where you can still inject some variability into it.
Okay. And then for those that are coaching sports, not invasion games,
Mm.
maybe it's a net sport, volleyball or tennis, or, a sport more like golf,
Yeah.
where there's either nobody directly opposing you, but there might be an opponent, or there's,
Mm-hmm.
with golf, there's actually, no opponent there.
Yeah.
How might you incorporate those ideas into practice for that type of sport?
Yeah, it's still, again, really counterintuitively. At times, things like throwing or shooting to a target, where even in the sport, in the competition, it might always be from the same spot, actually still benefits from practicing from different distances and ranges. So I think, well, if I did bring it back to basketball, free throw shooting would be an example. But say, I don't know, a sport like archery, where you're shooting from a standardized distance, actually it might still benefit to practice shooting a bit closer, a bit further away. So it's just this idea of variability better tunes in the system, because if you think each time you're executing a skill, you're trying to adapt in the moment to all those conditions. So just by varying each time means you are adapting each time rather than being able to roll out, the last repetition you just did. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for the discussion.